Hello, welcome to the Manasplained podcast. I'm Connor, and today I'll be talking about the deck I built for Jacques Vert. So he's really interesting because it's an Anthem but only for toughness, and so kind of finding a way to use that is kind of weird because it doesn't really do combat stuff, and yes, you could maybe do big butts kind of combat stuff, but I thought of a more interesting way to use that, and that's like the enrage mechanic that you see on dinosaurs sometime, or other cards that whenever they take damage, they have some sort of effect. So I built a deck that does that with a lot of fight mechanics as well, and ways to damage your whole board, and then a bunch of creatures that will benefit from this. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. I talk with everyone in the comments after these videos go up, and I love hearing about what you liked about the video, what you didn't like, what cards you would add, take out. If you've built these decks before or played with these cards, I love to hear you guys down there. So yeah, I'd love to talk to you after the video's up. So for the deck breakdown, 20 theme cards, 20 sub-theme cards, 3 synergy cards, 0 protection cards, and 5 Anthem cards. The commander is an Anthem effect of in itself, and I didn't really feel like you would need protection cards. I wanted more slots open for the theme and sub-theme cards, which are the theme are creatures taking damage and having effects, and that sub-theme is being able to deal damage to your own creatures. And then the synergy is the other part where it's like the deal damage with toughness during combat. So I wanted to leave more options open for that, and I didn't feel like, yeah, protection was going to be that necessary in a deck like this. And for the rest of the deck breakdown, we have 8 draw, 12 ramp, 12 removal, 4 wipes, and 37 lands. The ramp and removal is nice and high, which I like. The draw could be a little bit higher, but a lot of white card draw I'm not a huge fan of because it is symmetrical. It'll draw cards for your opponents and you, which I find more often than not will burn you. And the 4 board wipes is kind of high, but they are modal in a sense, and I'll get to those later. But altogether, that's 16 crossover cards. The number's very high. I try to aim for about 10 cards that fit into multiple categories at once. But the fact we have 16 here is absolutely amazing. It means the deck, whenever you draw a card, there's a high chance it's going to be able to do multiple things and have a high value per card, so I love where this deck's at. And like I said, the theme is creatures that take damage and then do something, so I'll go through those now. So probably one of my favorite cards in the history of Magic, Brash Taunter. Oh my god, so awesome. Flavor text, also phenomenal. I love goblins, one of my favorite tribes, and the fact that he is indestructible and then redirects that damage and can fight in of itself, it does everything this deck wants. It being 5 mana is a bit pricey, but you get to play him out, and then you'll get to use your damage on creature effects. And because he's indestructible, like, he can fight and he can take damage and he won't die, and then you just dishing that damage out to one of your opponents, spreading the love as it were. So good. Then we have True Fire Captain. For a while, a lot of people have been trying, and me as well, to build a kind of Boros deck where it's a lot of board wipes, you know, stuff like Brash Taunter and True Fire Captain and Boros Reckoner and a lot of those effects to really share the damage amongst your opponents when you end up wrathing the board. And this deck is the closest I've come to building something like that, so having other cards like Stuffy Doll, True Fire Captain, and Donna Noble in here to help share damage to your opponents whenever they take it is great. The fact that, like I said, Brash Taunter is destructible and then Stuffy Doll have indestructible means that they get to stick around for a while until someone exiles them, and they're great on defense, and they're, yeah, great for dishing out damage. They're just so good. I love all these cards. And then these cards actually can deal damage at creatures as well, so they function as removal when you deal damage to them. Phyrexian Vindicator probably being the strongest of the 3 here, because Boros Reckoner and Spite-Mare will take the damage and then dish it out, while Phyrexian Vindicator redirects the damage, and it can go to any target. So if any damage will be dealt to Phyrexian Vindicator, it just redirects it, so no damage ever gets marked on them. So it's almost like indestructible. It's basically indestructible, which is crazy. And then you can redirect that damage at planeswalkers or battles or creatures or opponents. Like, Phyrexian Vindicator is probably the strongest card in this deck, and I didn't really realize how powerful this card was when it first came out. I just looked at it and I'm like, oh, it's the white Phyrexian Obliterator. Great, that's so cool. But as I looked at it more, like, this card is absolutely bonkers. It's so crazy. So these are the cards that put counters on your creatures when they take damage. Vigor can't put counters on itself, which is unfortunate, but It can't go to the graveyard. It'll always get shuffled back into your library after it dies, so you can potentially draw it again later, get some more value out of it that way. And then, yeah, Rite of Passage being an enchantment is awesome because it means when you're dealing mass damage to your board, it can't die like a Vigor could, while also putting the 1/1 counters on stuff. So yeah, your creatures and your entire board can get pretty big if you're putting a couple counters on each creature every turn, when you're dealing all that self-damage. So yeah, these cards are great. And these are the cards that give you 1/1s. So normally something like Broodhatch, Nantuko, or Hornet's Nest, they would die when they take damage because Broodhatch only has 1. Broodhatch only has 1 toughness, and then Hornet's Nest only has 2 toughness. But because your commander gives you the +0/+2, it makes their butts a bit bigger, so they could survive a 2 damage hit, or in Nantuko's case, a 1 damage hit. So they become more reliable outlets for these 1/1s. And the 1/1s, because I do have a lot of like damaging the board like effects, the 1/1s would probably die when it comes around to doing that. So you do have to worry about that, but these 1/1s are more like sacrificial, as you don't mind swinging a bunch of them into somebody or using them just as chump blockers, and you can kind of make a horde and throw it around willy-nilly because you're comfortably just going to make them again. And then finally, these are the cards that make bigger than 1/1s. Sprouting Phytohydra makes a copy of itself, which is great. I mean, it doesn't have any power, but it can make a giant horde of this, and if you get any of the Anthem effects out that do give it like a +1 buff to its power or something, then they could start dealing damage. And Vondrous is crazy. He makes 4 5s. Now, they only get to attack or deal damage once, which is fine, but like, he gets to make 5 4s. He makes 5 4s. That's so big. You could deal a couple damage to him, have them out, like deal 3 damage to him, like 3 instances of damage. He gets 3 5 4s out. And then your next round about the table, you get to attack with 15 damage, and you could do that again. Like, holy crap, this card is so cool and awesome. And making like a dice rolling deck where he's the commander also sounds very fun too. And then these are the last kind of creatures or cards in this section that take damage that I couldn't really fit with anything else. Ranging Raptors, Rampant Growths whenever it takes damage, which is fantastic. Ripjaw Raptor draws you a card whenever it takes damage, which is also fantastic. And then Apex Altasaur. This card is bananas because when it enters the battlefield, it fights something, which is great. You get to kill something because it's a 10/10. But then when it takes damage, you can fight again if you want to. So it enters the battlefield, it'll kill like three or four things maybe, and then you don't attack the last time to keep it around. And then you do mass damage to your board, or you just choose to deal damage to it, and then it gets to fight a bunch of stuff again. Like, Apex Altasaur is ridiculous. This card is amazing. It is expensive at 9 mana, but it is so strong. And with the sub-theme, I needed ways to deal damage to my creatures, and I needed to be consistent, which is why there's 20 of them in the deck, just like there's 20 theme cards. Subterranean Tremor is probably the strongest of these 3 group damage-like effects, because its modalness, if it costs 5, it destroys all artifacts, and then if it costs 9, you get to make an 8/8 lizard that will just be probably the last creature on the board, because 8 damage to the board is a lot of damage. But then Roiling Earthquake is definitely better than Earthquake, because it hits stuff with flying, which Earthquake doesn't, which is unfortunate, but that's fine, because you're probably only putting 1 or 2 mana into it to deal damage to your board, but the modalness to be able to clear out a bunch of creatures is great, but it can't hit stuff with flying, which, again, is unfortunate, unlike Roiling Earthquake, which will hit stuff without horsemanship, which is weird that it says that. It's because, like, yeah, horsemanship's a weird mechanic. It's like an alternate version of flying that you don't see very much. But yeah, all these cards are fantastic, and their modalness to be board wipes and just be like 1 or 2 damage on creatures is so good. And then these are the cards that ping creatures just every turn consistently or when they enter. So yeah, Marauding Raptor and Aether Flash just deal 2 damage to a creature as it enters the battlefield. Marauding Raptors are your own creatures only, but Aether Flash is all creatures. So Aether Flash is really strong in that sense, because if your opponent's casting small stuff, it just kills it, which is great. And then Cinder Giant will deal 2 damage to each other creature you control during your upkeep, which means that it's just every turn you get to deal 2 damage to all your creatures, which is great because it lets you proc a bunch of these enrage effects, which is what you're trying to do. 2 very interesting cards in this category, though, are Caltrops and Power Stone Minefield. These deal damage to creatures when they attack, and then Power Stone Minefield also deals damage when it blocks. So this incentivizes you to attack and block, and it kind of disincentivizes your opponents to attack and block. So they might be more hesitant to put out attacks if Caltrops is out, and then if Power Stone Minefield's out, essentially all of your creatures get a 2 power bump because they're dealing 2 extra damage to all their creatures when they're blocking. So this helps you get more damage through, helps you deal damage to all your enraged creatures, and Power Stone Minefield's 2 damage kind of negates the 2 toughness from Jacques Vert. So because of that, it's like nothing happening. It's just a regular creature in that way. So yeah, I really like these cards here because of how consistent they can be and how they disincentivize your opponents, and you can kind of break parity on them. These are some more damage to the board like effects. Fiery Confluence, you can choose to do more than once for each of the things. So you could activate the first one, deal some damage to each of your creatures, and then activate the second one, hit some opponents for life. Maybe you want to do that, or you could destroy 2 artifacts with it. It's really modal in that way, and it's a very useful card. I've never put it in a deck before, but it seems really good, especially in a deck like this. And then Pyrohemia is a classic card. It's amazing. It's the red version of Pestilence, and the fact that it's 1 mana, 1 damage to each creature and each player, so you're taking out your opponent's life totals, potentially taking out their creatures, and then damaging your creatures for more enrage effect stuff is phenomenal. And then Harbinger of the Hunt, dealing 1 damage to each creature without flying, or 1 damage to creature with flying. That modalness as well there is super great, and it being a 5/3 with flying means that you could activate the deal damage to creatures without flying multiple times, and it'll be safe, which is super useful. And then Fire Ants is interesting, because if you activate Fire Ants, it kills itself, which is really annoying. But that's why I have the 5 different Anthems in the deck, because if I have any of those out, they'll buff Fire Ants' toughness, because Jacques Vert doesn't, and that will let it stick around, and it becomes another repeatable damage to the whole board effect. That's awesome. And then these are the fight effects that let all of your enraged creatures fight. Waita, I think that's how you pronounce her name, Waita maybe, is awesome because it's a 1 green mana, and then 2 of your creatures fight each other. And because of the toughness boost, if you have like 1/1s fighting each other, or like 2/1s fighting each other, even with the toughness boost from your commander, that won't matter. And then it also doubles the triggered abilities of your creatures getting hit, so you make more insect tokens or sapling tokens, or you draw more cards, you find more lands, whatever. That card's awesome, and I kind of want to make like this. You could sub this out for Jacques as the commander if you wanted to, but I kind of like having Jacques there just because of the toughness bonus and how that's super helpful. And then another very strong card in the deck, Uvenwald Tracker, just a 1 mana creature that you can then pay to and tap, and then a creature you control fights another creature, and one of your creatures could fight another one of your creatures, or it could fight an opponent's creature. That modal this there, where it's only 2 mana for that effect, is fantastic. And then the other 3 cards are more just fight cards, like Rule Rage Reese. Whenever it or another creature enters the battlefield, that creature fights a creature an opponent controls, so you can't fight your own stuff with it, but still very strong. And then Inscription of Abundance, which if you kicked it, you get to choose all 3 modes, which is so good because putting counters on a creature, gain X life, where X is the power of that creature, and then it fights an opponent's creature. Like, doing all 3 of those things for 5 mana is actually so insane, especially the 2/1/1 counters really upping its power and toughness. Maybe it makes it able to kill the creature it's fighting or survive the fight. Just so good. And then Cetacean Tactics, you really want to be playing this a turn after you dump a lot of creatures, because if you spend this like 6 mana on this, 5 creatures will all be able to tap and fight that turn, and they all get +1/+1. So this could be a board wipe depending on how much mana you're putting into it. Maybe not, depending on what you're playing against. I didn't put it under board wipes for that reason, but it's still really strong. And I love the strive mechanic, like it's just a different version of Kicker. Kicker is one of the best mechanics they've ever printed, and I love when they just find different ways to kind of mess with Kicker, and Strive is one of my favorite alternate versions of that. And then the last cards in this category, I have the 2 of the Domri Planeswalkers, and then Staff of Nin. So Domri's interesting because their minus ability is fight, which is great, but they have different plus abilities that are very useful. Domri Raid is like a draw, kind of a draw effect. It's not really a draw effect because it's just revealing. And if it's not a creature, nothing happens, which is unfortunate, but you do get to draw a creature with it every now and again, which is very useful. while Domrianic of Bolas gives a powered bump, which is nice for the fighting stuff, but it is ramp, and it stops your creature spells from being countered, which is just super useful. And then Staff of Nin, just a beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card, so an additional draw effect while being able to damage any of your creatures by tapping it. All three of these cards are fantastic, Staff of Nin being so good as an extra draw card in the deck. And for the synergy category, only have 3 cards, and those are dealing toughness as damage in combat. So there are definitely more than 3 of these effects in these colors, but I didn't want to put too many of these in the deck because I really feel like this isn't really what the main point of the deck is, and these are all the 3 or less mana versions that are the most efficient and relatively super cheap in price. And so because of that, I really thought they were good to add in that way. The interesting one here, like the most interesting one here in my opinion, is Assault Formation, because it does have the ability to pump your board's toughness if you need to do that. I can't see you doing that often, but it does have that additional functionality that could come in handy. I love the Anthem category in this deck. The reason I love it is because Anthems are very interesting, because when Wizards of the Coast makes cards, their creatures have a power and toughness for a reason, and when you can make it higher, it lets them do stuff they weren't designed to do. Like previously Nantuko being a 1/1, it's designed to take a damage and then make a 1/1 and not stick around. But if you can make its toughness higher, it can survive the damage and repeatably do that. So Anthems are very interesting in that way. I definitely don't run them in enough decks, especially some of my other creature decks I probably should be running them in. But I think I might do that now, especially with how many good Anthems there are out there. So these are the 5 I added. Mirari's Wake is, if you have a deck with Selesnya in it, there's a good chance you're running it. The +1/+1 Anthem effect is fantastic, but also the mana doubling on your lands is absolutely ridiculous. It's so strong. And then Sylvan Anthem is interesting because it gives your green creatures like Jacques Vert, it just bumps your green creatures up, but also when a green creature enters, you get to scry 1, and that counts for your tokens as well. So all of your tokens let you scry 1, which can help you filter through your deck and let you find the cards you need to. Spider Silk only giving +0/+1, but Reach is a very interesting kind of effect there. Leyline of Vitality is a ley line, so if you have it in your opening hand, you just get to put it on the battlefield for free, which is, I mean, that's insane. It is only a toughness boost like Jacques, which you really only need a toughness boost in this deck. And then it also gains you life when your creatures enter the battlefield, which is also fantastic. And then Parapet, I think that's how you pronounce that. Again, just a toughness boost. But you could flash it out for a turn. It would get sacrificed, which is unfortunate, but it does have that additional functionality, which is nice. Unfortunately, with this deck, I only have 8 draw cards in it. Because most of the draw effects in green require big, huge creatures and stuff like that, and this deck is more low to the ground, I didn't get to run a lot of effects like that, but we are going wide, so we do get to have some more go wide effects that draw you cards. So Toski and Alran Frostfang are some of those go wide draw effects. Whenever creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card. These are great. Toski also indestructible, so can survive those the mass borders or the mass damage that you're going to be doing. And Alran Frostfang having 6 toughness, being able to survive all that stuff too, is great. Harmonize. Harmonize is a weird card. It gets a lot of flack out there for being 4 mana, draw 3 cards, and a lot of people don't like it. But if I have a green deck, and it's like green white, green red, or whatever, I'm running Harmonize. It's for 4 mana just to put 3 cards into your hand. Honestly, because you're in green, you're going to be doing enough ramp. That's a perfectly reasonable kind of cost for an effect like that, even if it is that sorcery speed. And then you saw Staff in earlier. It's 6 mana, which is very expensive, but it can draw you a bunch of cards. The other 4 draw effects, I put Domri in here because it technically can draw you cards, but Shamanic Revelation draws you a card for each creature you control, which is like insane if you manage to flood the board, and with all the token makers in this deck, it's going to be drawing you a bunch of cards. Beast Whisperer draws you a card whenever you cast a creature spell. Again, phenomenal. Abzan Beastmaster is interesting because it cares about biggest toughness on the board, and you're going to be dealing enough damage to the board, and you're probably going to be able to kill some of your opponent's creatures with fight spells and stuff, that you're probably going to be the only one with big toughness creatures out. Unless someone's going super massive, which in that case, that kind of sucks. But, hey, you're going to be probably able to handle that and be able to draw cards with it. So for the ramp category, we're in green. We're doing green ramp stuff, which is getting lands out. And I shied away from the 4 mana ones because we really want to be casting Jacques on as soon as possible instead of ramping more. So you got your classic Soul Ring, just so strong. But then we also have Goblin Archomancer and Marauding Raptor, making like your spells cost 1 less to cast. Marauding Raptor for creatures, Goblin and Archomancer for red or green spells. Reducing casting cost of cards is absolutely phenomenal. Goblin and Archomancer, I feel like I don't see it enough, but it's one of the strongest ramp spells I've ever played. Playing that and then playing a Rampant Growth for 1 green mana is kind of ridiculous. And the amount of mana it'll save you over the course of a game it's insane. Ranging Raptors, again, because of the toughness boost, you're going to be able to damage it multiple times in a turn, and it's going to be able to block, and you're going to get a ton of lands off it. And people aren't going to remove it because it's a 2/3. It's going to be a 2/5 with Jacques out, but like people aren't going to kill it because doesn't look like a threat, but it's going to get you enough mana that you're going to be able to play threats, and they're going to have to deal with those. Mirari's Wake, again, this card's busted. I put it in almost every Selesnya deck I have. And then Domri, Anarch of Bolas, making your stuff uncounterable while giving you a mana. These are all the 2 mana ramp spells I'm running in the deck, which, like I said, become 1 mana if you have Goblin and Archomancer out, which is ridiculous. I'm running a bunch of typed lands in the deck. They do enter tapped, but because they have mountain plains on them or forest whatever on it, you can find them with your Farseeks and your 3 Visits Nature's Lore and stuff like that. And then Into the North can find the Snow Duels, which I'm still a huge fan of. I really like those lands because Into the North makes it so that you can find any of the colors you need at that time, which is phenomenal. And then Rampant Growth and Sakura Tribal, they're just classic green ramp spells that I have a hard time cutting. So the removal is a lot different than I would normally do for a deck because I needed a lot of room. I needed 40 cards worth of room for the theme and the sub-theme. I didn't have a lot of room for good removal, which might be a hindrance for this deck, the fact that there's no super good removal and that there isn't enough card draw, so that might be a big issue with the deck. But again, it's an Enrage deck. It's not supposed to be meta. It's probably sitting around a 6 for power, and so I'm fine with the removal and card draw being at a lower number that way. Saw these cards earlier. Again, they can take out creatures. Phyrexian Vindicator can also take out creatures, planeswalkers, and battles. These cards are great. Super strong. Love to play them. Love to see them. And then the other removal of this deck is going to be Fight. So Inscription and Abundance, Tussian Tactics, you already saw them. More Fight stuff, which is great. Domri and Domri are both more fight things, which is great for taking out your opponent's creatures. Fiery Confluence can hit artifacts, which is super nice. And then more fight stuff to be able to take out creatures if you need to, especially Apex Allosaur. That card is bonkers. So the board wipes are all creature based, and you've already seen them before, so I will just go through them quickly. So all these board wipes, they're modal, so they are either damage for your creatures so that you can get more enrage effects off, or you could pump the numbers up and really take out a bunch of creatures at once if you need to. Again, Subterranean Tremor is probably the best because it does the most rebuilding for you, while if you pump enough mana into it, you do get an 8/8, and it can also blow up all artifacts. So for the lands, it's a pretty standard land package for the deck, but I do have one very special land that I'll go over. So, pretty bog standard land package. Like I said, Highland Forest represents all the snow lands and the lands with types on them, so they're fetchable. Croson Verge is really interesting, and I put it in any deck that has at least green and white in it. Even if a deck is 4 colors or 5 colors, I will run Croson Verge because it lets you find the colors you need, which is great. If you're in a 4-color deck, you can find all 4 colors with it. If you're in a 5-color deck and you're running the Triomes, you can find all 5 colors with it, which is just awesome. And then, yeah, Selesnya Sanctuary, the bounce lands are great because they essentially draw you a card because they let you hit your land drops by bouncing a land back to your hand. And then Spectator Seeding, Wizards of the Coast, please put the multiplayer format lands in the multiplayer format decks. Please put these lands in the precons. Everyone would love you for it. And then the super special land, which I don't think I'd ever seen before until building this deck, was Arena, where you can pay 3 and tap it to tap a creature you control and a target creature of an opponent's choice, and then they fight. It's a land that has fight on it, kind of. It's very interesting. Your opponent gets to pick the creature, so you do have to be careful about that. If they only have a couple, like if they have 2 creatures and like they're both not super big, then you're lucking out that way. But if your opponent has a massive creature, Arena doesn't do much. Hence why the land count in this deck is 37, because Arena technically doesn't count as a land because it doesn't tap for mana. So the maybes were interesting. You'll see some cards in here that I put in every other deck that has white or something like that, because like I normally add them, but I needed so much space for the main theme of this deck, I had to cut a lot of good cards. So you'll see Stroke of Midnight, Dismantling Wave, cards that I run in every white deck, except for this one apparently. I also cut Beast Within and Generous Gift because, again, I needed room for all the stuff that is more thematic and fits what the deck's trying to do. I also cut a bunch of cards like Tremor, Cinderclasm, and Shake the Foundations. All of these are great. Maybe I should be running Shake the Foundations instead of like Fiery Confluence, maybe, because the draws a card, but these were all really close to making it, but you do have to make cuts in the end. In the last 5 maybes, you have Baldin and Belligerent Brontodon. They both deal the toughness rather than power for combat, which is great. They're great cards, but I didn't want more than 3 of those effects, and they are a little pricey on mana cost, so I didn't want to put them in the deck for that reason. Force of Savagery is hilarious, because it's a 0/8 for 3, but if you have a commander out, it actually gets to survive, and it has trample. It's kind of like one of the lightning ball like cards in red, where you could spend like 2 mana for like a 5/1 with trample and haste, and it gets sacrificed at the end step or something like that. It's the green version of that, which I love, but it won't stick around in this deck, unfortunately. So I just thought it'd be interesting to talk about here because I really like the card. It's very cool. And then Golden Guardian, I really wanted to put this in the deck, and I thought it was going to be close, but not enough of the creatures in the deck have a power of 4 to be able to kill it, which is unfortunate. I could just keep it around as a pay 2, it fights another thing, and then it gets that off, but it can only fight your stuff, it can't fight other stuff, so it loses that modality, and it's not super likely to die to flip, which is what you want it to do. I could see myself putting it back in and cutting something else out, but at the end of the day, I just didn't think it made the cut. And Seaboard Muse, I would love to put Seaboard Muse in the deck. There's a ton of tap effects and other stuff, and that could, Seaboard Muse you could so use Seaboard Muse to just break and be super powerful with. But the card's very expensive. It's over 20 bucks, at least that's what it said when I was putting the deck together. And I don't like putting in cards that are too expensive because I kind of, not that I want the decks to be budget, but I just don't want them to be samey, as in me just putting in a bunch of really powerful, expensive cards. So now to you. Let me know in the comments what you thought. I loved putting this deck together. He was honestly one of the commanders I was most looking forward to when doing the series, because I've seen him pop up every now and again because his effect is so weird and it seems like it does nothing, but if you can do something like this, it really becomes to good effect, which is nice. What cards did I make mistakes in the maybe board? Would you have added some of those in and took some other cards out that you think wouldn't be nearly as good? Maybe I'm overhyping them. Yeah, and I'd love to see if you've ever played with any of these cards down in the comments. This is all of my socials. I don't stream on Twitch anymore. I wasn't getting a large enough audience, and it just kind of seemed like a waste of time right now. Definitely when I get bigger and I can get a larger audience on there more consistently, I'm thinking at least like 20 to 50 people per stream over on Twitch. I'll definitely do that, because just sitting here and waiting for people to join and no one really joins was boring, and the few times I had like 8 to 10 people, I really enjoyed it when people were active in the chat, but for right now I'm gonna stop that. But my Twitter is still up. I do post when these videos go up, and if you want to DM me for any reason, DM me on Twitter. I'm most likely going to respond there. I'm going to start making TikTok content soon, just as well as YouTube Shorts, so look out for that. I'm probably going to start cross-posting my YouTube Shorts and my TikToks over to Reddit, because why not? And then Architects and Moxfield are where all these deck lists live. So thanks for watching, and as always, get building, splainers. That is so